Looking at sensory pathways, we'll start with the visual pathway. Light is a stimulus that activates the visual pathway, and it flows into the eye and hits the retina at the back of the eye. And it travels through the retina, which is primarily 3 layers of cells. First the ganglion cells, then the bipolar cells, and then the photoreceptor cells. Light travels all the way through this and interacts with the photoreceptor cells. In the membrane of the photoreceptor cells are these proteins called ospins, and light creates a conformational change from a trans to a cis. And this activates the photoreceptor cell, which at rest is depolarized and releasing a neurotransmitter that is inhibitory. In this case, it's glutamate. But when it's activated, it hyperpolarizes due to an inflow of negative ions and an outflow of positive ions. And when this happens, the hyperpolarization decreases the release of glutamate into the synapse, and the bipolar cell, without the inhibitory neurotransmitter, can depolarize due to an inflow of potassium into the cell. This depolarization leads directly to a neurotransmitter release with the ganglion synapse, and this activates the ganglion synapse by depolarizing it with an inflow of potassium. And the ganglion cell is the first cell that can create an action potential, and this action potential carries the signal to the next synapse. The ganglion cell, before it synapses, it has a partial decussation at the optic chiasm, where information from the left field of view goes to the right side of the brain, and information from the right field of view goes to the left side of the brain. After that, the neuron synapses at the lateral geniculate nucleus, and then from there, it synapses at the primary visual cortex, where the information is further processed in parallel processing pathways of the dorsal and ventral streams. Next, the auditory pathway is activated by sound waves that enter the ear and hit this membrane here. And when the sound waves hit this membrane, it moves the 3 inner ear bones, the last of which moves up against the ovial window, and the ovial window takes this movement and turns the sound waves into fluid waves, because the cochlea in this is filled with fluid. So when the fluid waves enter the cochlea, they move this membrane called the basal membrane. The basal membrane has epithelial cells on it, which are called hair cells, and these hair cells move against another membrane when the basal membrane is moved, and this causes the hair cells to bend from this to this. So this is the hair cell in rest, and this is the hair cell when it gets moved against the other membrane when the basal membrane is moved from the fluid waves. And this movement causes the cilia to bend, and these ion channels here become open because they are mechanoreceptors. And this opening causes the potassium and calcium to flow in, and this causes a depolarization of the hair cell. And the depolarization leads to a release of the neurotransmitter glutamate, which can activate the first order neuron in the pathway. And this neuron synapses with the ventral cochlea nucleus, and then it synapses with the superior olive, where there's a crossing of the midline and a partial decussation, where some of the information from the left ear is going to the right side of the brain, and some of the information from the right ear is going to the left side of the brain. And then from there, the next synapse is the inferior glycolus, and then after that, the next synapse is the medial geniculate nucleus, which is in the thalamus, and then it goes to the auditory cortex where the information is processed. So those are the auditory and visual pathways.